I didn't expect the call. It came at the end of an ordinary Friday afternoon, just as I was closing a file on the Reynolds project. The phone rang, slicing through the quiet hum of the office. My assistant, Jenna, poked her head through the door, her face pale. "Sarah, Veronica wants you in the boardroom. Now." My stomach dropped. Veronica, my stepmother, had barely spoken to me since she took over as CEO after Dad's health started to decline. I tried to brush off the dread settling in my chest, but it was like trying to push away thick fog. I adjusted my blazer, smoothing the fabric as I made my way down the long corridor, heels clicking against the polished marble. The company had always felt like a second home. My father built it from the ground up, and I had been by his side every step of the way. Now, the walls seemed to close in around me, their polished surfaces reflecting a distorted version of my own apprehension. The door to the boardroom loomed large, and when I pushed it open, every face turned toward me. Veronica stood at the head of the table, her presence cold and immaculate, her lips curved into a tight, polished smile. "Sarah, good of you to join us," she said, her tone laced with a sugary sweetness that made my skin crawl. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite nod. I took a seat near the end of the table, sensing the tension in the air. Veronica didn't bother to wait. She cleared her throat, her manicured fingers tapping the polished wood. "As of today," she began, her voice slicing through the silence, "we're undergoing some restructuring to streamline operations. Unfortunately, this means some roles will be dissolved, including yours." My mind went blank. I barely registered the words, their meaning trickling in like slow, icy water. "What?" I whispered, disbelief seeping into my voice. She didn't even flinch. "Your position is no longer necessary, effective immediately." It was as if the floor had given way beneath me. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the murmurs around the table. Veronica extended a paper toward me, a termination letter, already signed and dated. I reached for it, my hand trembling. Her gaze was sharp, triumphant, and I knew she had planned this, orchestrated it to perfection while I was too busy keeping the company afloat during Dad's illness. "Why?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. She tilted her head, feigning pity. "It's just business, Sarah. Nothing personal. You'll be compensated generously, of course." Her words felt like barbed wire scraping my skin. The room spun, memories of long nights, strategic plans, and years of loyalty, flashing behind my eyes. My father's office, his laughter, his pride when he spoke of me. I could almost hear his voice. "You're my legacy, Sarah." And then something snapped inside me. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, unexpected, wild, almost hysterical. It filled the room, bouncing off the walls. The board members looked at me with a mix of confusion and discomfort. Veronica's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all, the betrayal wrapped in such pristine packaging. I stood, still laughing, the sound ringing out like shattered glass. I looked straight into Veronica's eyes, the laughter dying into a bitter smile. "Congratulations, Veronica," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I hope you know exactly what you've inherited." Without another word, I turned and left the room, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor as I walked down the corridor, still smiling. The cold air outside hit my face, grounding me. I didn't cry. Not yet. As I reached the parking lot, I glanced back at the building, my father's legacy wrapped up in glass and steel, now stained by betrayal. I thought of my father. How proud he was of me. How he would have never let this happen if he were well. I whispered under my breath, "I'm not done yet." That laughter, the one that had shocked the room, still simmered under my skin. No longer. From disbelief, but from something else. A spark. The kind of spark that starts a fire. When my father first introduced me to Veronica, I remember thinking how perfect she looked. Immaculate. Her blonde hair styled to perfection, her smile a shade, too white to be real. She moved through our house as if she'd lived there her whole life, adjusting picture frames, rearranging flowers, smoothing out the wrinkles in our lives, as if everything could be fixed with a little polish and a lot of charm. I was 25, at the time, already knee-deep in the family business, shadowing my father at every meeting, every negotiation, learning the ropes the hard way, just as he intended. "You have to earn it," he'd always say, his voice gruff but affectionate. I never minded. I wanted to earn it. When he brought Veronica home, she seemed like a breath of fresh air. My father's eyes would light up when she entered the room. She was younger than him by at least 15 years, but I could see the way she made him feel, like he was invincible again. I wanted to believe she loved him for more than just his success, for more than just the penthouse views and the custom-tailored suits. So I ignored the small things at first, like how her smile never quite reached her eyes when she spoke to me, or the way she would subtly redirect conversations during family dinners, turning the focus away from me and my role in the company. I remember one particular evening. She leaned across the table, her manicured nails tapping against the polished wood as she spoke about modernizing the business. My father, enchanted by her enthusiasm, listened intently, nodding along as if she held the secret to success itself. I spoke up, cautious but firm, explaining the risks of changing our core strategies. Her eyes flicked to me, a flash of something cold and sharp before she smiled again. "Oh, Sarah," she said with a chuckle, her voice dripping with condescension. "You've done so well learning the basics, but there's always room for improvement, don't you think?" My father laughed, one of those deep belly laughs that made his shoulders shake. "She's right, you know. We have to keep up with the times," he said, patting my hand. His touch was warm, reassuring, but Veronica's eyes watched me from across the table, unblinking, unyielding. I told myself I was imagining it. Paranoia, I thought. She was just trying to help. But then came the meetings. My father began bringing her into strategic discussions, first as an observer, then as an advisor. Her presence grew like ivy, creeping into every corner of the company. She introduced concepts that contradicted our long-standing principles, her words dripping with promises of innovation and expansion. My father, desperate to keep the company thriving, listened to her every word. I remember the first time she disagreed with me in front of the board. It was subtle, a suggestion that maybe my figures were a bit conservative, that perhaps I wasn't looking at the big picture. My father waved off my concerns, smiling that trusting smile of his. "Veronica just wants what's best for us," he'd say. But it wasn't just business. Slowly, she began rearranging more than just boardroom strategies. She redecorated our home, replaced the old oak table my mother had cherished with a sleek glass one that felt as cold and unwelcoming as she was. Family photos were taken down, replaced with modern art that felt like strangers staring at me from the walls. The smell of my mother's favorite lavender-scented candles faded, replaced with the sharp bite of designer perfumes that clung to Veronica's skin. I still remember the day I walked into the house to find my mother's jewelry box. Gone from the living room display, Veronica stood by the fireplace, sipping champagne with a smile that didn't belong. "I had it moved," she said casually, as if it were a trinket and not a legacy. It didn't match the new decor. My heart cracked, just a little. I swallowed, the lump in my throat, forcing a smile. "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "It's your house too." But the warning signs were there, and I ignored them. It wasn't until my father fell ill that I began to truly understand. Veronica took control faster than I could have anticipated. Board meetings were rescheduled to suit her calendar. Financial decisions were made without my input. I would arrive at the office to find changes already in motion, new faces in critical positions, files moved or mysteriously missing. When I voiced my concerns, she would smile that polished smile and place a manicured hand on my shoulder. "We all want what's best for the company," she would say, her eyes glimmering with something unspoken. "I'm just stepping in while your father recovers. You understand, don't you?" I nodded, because what choice did I have? My father's health was fragile, and Veronica held the keys to his well-being. I watched her orchestrate her control with the precision of a conductor, slowly, methodically, and with a smile that belied her intentions. The day she was appointed CEO, I wasn't even there. I found out through an internal memo. My name not, even listed as a recipient. Veronica stepped into the role as if she had been born for it, her voice soft but firm as she addressed the board, promising fresh perspectives and streamlined efficiency. I confronted her in her new office, a glass-encased fortress on the top floor that had once been my father's. Her smile was indulgent, her eyes unyielding. "You don't have to worry, Sarah," she said, her voice like silk. "Everything is under control." I wanted to scream, to throw her out of the building that my father and I had built from nothing. But I didn't. I couldn't. My father's health, his trust in her. I swallowed my pride and nodded, knowing full well that something had been set into motion. Something I couldn't stop. Not yet. Frustration simmered beneath my skin, but it didn't burn me out. It fueled me. Each page I read, each connection I uncovered, it stitched me back together piece by piece. I found myself waking up earlier, staying up later, scribbling notes, and cross-referencing files until my eyes burned. I had nothing but time and clarity, both gifts that Veronica had unwittingly given me. On the 5th morning, just as dawn stretched across the water in shades of pink and gold, there was a knock at the door. My heart slammed against my ribs. No one knew I was here. No one but... I cracked the door open, and there he stood, Mr. Harris. His hair was grayer than I remembered, his frame a little more bent, but his eyes still held that spark of defiance that had made him my father's most trusted advisor. "I heard you were out here," he said, his voice rough but warm. I didn't ask how he knew. I just stepped aside and let him in. He glanced around the cabin, nodding to himself as if it were exactly as he had imagined. I offered him coffee, and we sat by the window where the light filtered in through the trees, casting long shadows across the floor. "Your father..." "He was smart," Mr. Harris began, leaning back in his chair. "But he trusted the wrong people." "She's been bleeding the company dry," I replied, sliding the journal across the table. "I don't know how I didn't see it." He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the notes with practiced ease. "You wouldn't have. That's the point," he said quietly. "People like Veronica, they're good at this. She probably had her claws in him long before you noticed." My hands clenched around my coffee mug. "I have to stop her," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could reconsider. "I can't let her get away with it." His eyes met mine, the years of experience and betrayal etched in his gaze. "You'll need proof," he said simply, "and you'll need to know where to look." Mr. Harris stayed for hours, combing through documents, pointing out discrepancies, showing me where the money had been laundered, how the accounts were hidden beneath layers of shell corporations. He was patient, deliberate, peeling back each layer of deceit like he was unwrapping a present. Days blurred together as we worked. The sun would rise and set outside the cabin's dusty windows, but inside, time held no meaning. We uncovered it all, the fake accounts, the offshore holdings, the signatures that didn't match. I found Veronica's initials stamped beside fraudulent approvals, money funneled into secret investments, her name threaded through every shady deal. I would sit at the wooden desk that faced the lake, stacks of papers piled around me, my father's, journal always open beside me. Mr. Harris would bring in coffee and crack open dusty file boxes, spreading the contents across the floor in a web of paper trails. There were moments of exhaustion, but they were fleeting. My body was tired, but my mind was sharper than ever. I saw things I hadn't seen before. Patterns, signatures, dates that didn't align. My hands ached from writing. My eyes burned from scanning documents for hours on end. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Veronica had taken everything from me, my job, my father's legacy, my own identity within the company. But she had left me with something far more valuable, the truth. And I was going to use it. One night, as the fire crackled, low in the cabin's stone fireplace, Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair, stretching his tired limbs. "You've got enough," he said, nodding to the piles of evidence we'd amassed. "More than enough, actually. This could ruin her." I stared down at the stack of papers, each one a nail in Veronica's coffin. A wave of satisfaction washed over me, steady and unyielding. "It's not enough," I whispered. "Not yet." Mr. Harris chuckled, his eyes twinkling with something like pride. "Your father would be proud," he said softly. "He always said you had the heart of a lion." My gaze drifted to the leather journal lying open beside me. My father's handwriting scrawled across the page, his plans, his dreams, his legacy, and Veronica had tried to steal it all. I ran my hand over the worn leather, my heart steady and resolved. "I'm going to make sure she never forgets what she tried to take," I whispered. I glanced out the window, the lake stretching out like glass, reflecting the moonlight. In that moment, I knew I wasn't just surviving. I was rebuilding. I was preparing for war. The drive back to the city felt different this time, no longer the retreat of a broken woman, but the arrival of something stronger, sharper. The skyline rose against the morning haze, cutting through the horizon like blades of steel. I gripped the steering wheel, my father's leather-bound journal, resting on the passenger seat, its pages filled with secrets Veronica never imagined I'd find. It had taken weeks of studying, of cross-referencing, of piecing together the threads she had woven so meticulously. Offshore accounts, hidden assets, funds funneled into shell companies that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. But she wasn't as clever as she thought. People left breadcrumbs, an email trail here, a suspicious signature there. It was all there, waiting to be found. And I had found it. The lobby of the company building was as pristine as I remembered. Shiny floors reflecting the light from overhead chandeliers, walls adorned with art Veronica had insisted would modernize the space. It had always felt cold, too perfect, too sterile. I straightened my shoulders and walked through the entrance, heels clicking against marble like a war drum. I didn't ask for permission. I walked straight to the elevator, ignoring the shocked stares of the receptionists and staff who had once whispered my name with reverence. Now, they only whispered with pity. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than I remembered. I watched the numbers climb, my reflection staring back at me from the mirrored walls. My hair was tied back tightly, my suit pressed and immaculate. I looked like I belonged. I did belong. I started with Mr. Caldwell. He was the most influential board member, a man my father had trusted. His office door was slightly ajar, the soft hum of classical music drifting into the hallway. I knocked once, pushing it open before he could respond. "Sarah?" His brow furrowed as he set down his coffee. I didn't expect. I placed the folder on his desk, thick, heavy, filled with documents that would unravel the empire Veronica had built. He looked from the folder to me, his fingers hesitating before he opened it. I watched his face pale as he flipped through page after page. Account numbers, offshore transfers, illegally signed documents, my father's signature, forged. His eyes flicked back to me, disbelief shadowing his expression. "How did you—" he whispered. "It's all there," I replied calmly, my voice steady. "Everything she's been doing behind your back. Behind my father's back." He exhaled slowly, his hand still gripping the edges of the folder, as if it might disappear if he let go. "Sarah, this is enough to remove her," I finished. "For him. Permanently." He didn't speak for a moment, just nodded, his eyes scanning the evidence again, as if needing to make sure it was real. "We need to call the board," he finally said, his voice firmer than it had been moments ago. "I already did," I replied, letting a smile slip onto my lips. "They're waiting for us." The boardroom was full by the time we arrived. Veronica sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped elegantly in front of her, fingers adorned with diamonds that caught the light. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Sarah," she cooed, her voice dripping with condescension. "I wasn't aware you had business here today." I set the stack of folders down in front of her. "You seem to have missed a few things," I said evenly. "I thought I'd help clear it up." The board members exchanged glances, whispers threading through the room like static. Veronica's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered with something. Fear, perhaps. "And what exactly am I supposed to be looking at?" she asked, flipping open the folder. Her eyes skimmed the first page, her smile faltering. "Offshore accounts," I said, my voice strong and unyielding. "Money funneled from company assets. My father's accounts, your signatures. Forged. Dates that don't match. Transactions hidden under false names." Her hand froze on the paper, her knuckles going white. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her eyes blazing. "You expect anyone to believe—" "I do," I cut in sharply, my voice slicing through her accusations. "I have timestamps, emails, witnesses." I gestured to the board members, several of whom nodded, their faces pale and taut. "You manipulated my father when he was vulnerable. You stripped the company of its assets and hid them away. And you did it with his name." Her eyes darted around the room, seeking support. But there was none. Even her most loyal allies looked away, their eyes fixed on the polished table as if they might disappear into it. "Enough of this," she snapped, slamming the folder shut. "This isn't a courtroom, and you have no authority here." "Oh, I think I do," I replied, stepping forward. I pulled out one final piece of paper, the one I'd saved for last. I laid it out before her, watching the blood drain from her face. It was a letter, dated last year, a request for power of attorney, one she had forged after my father fell ill. His signature, her manipulation, the final nail in her coffin. The room fell silent. Veronica's hand shook as she reached for the paper, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This isn't... You can't..." I straightened, my hands resting on the back of the chair in front of me. "The board has already voted," I said evenly. "You're being removed, effective immediately. Your assets are frozen. The authorities will be contacted by the end of the day." The silence that followed was absolute. The door to the boardroom creaked open, and my breath caught in my throat. My father stepped inside, his frame thinner than I remembered, his face lined with fatigue. But his eyes, they were clear. "Awake, Veronica," he said, his voice steady despite its frailty. "It's over." Her eyes went wild, desperation clawing at her features. You don't understand," she stammered, reaching for him. But he stepped back, his gaze hardening. "I trusted you," he whispered. "I trusted you with everything." Tears brimmed in, his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. I felt my heart tighten, the years of pain and betrayal catching up to him all at once. I moved to his side, slipping my hand into his, and he squeezed it, his grip stronger than I expected. Veronica was led out by security, her heels clicking against the marble, each step fainter than the last. The room remained silent until the doors swung shut behind her, leaving only the echo of her departure. My father turned to me, his eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper, pride. "You did it," he whispered. "You brought it all back." I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodding as I squeezed his hand tighter. "It was always ours," I replied softly. "I was just taking it back." The courtroom was packed. Rows of wooden benches, stretched from wall to wall, filled with spectators, journalists, and whispers that seemed to ripple through the room like a tide. Flashbulbs went off outside the tall glass windows, the media hungry for any glimpse of Veronica, the woman who had once been hailed as a symbol of modern corporate success, now stripped of her mask for all to see. I stood near the front, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my back straight, my eyes fixed forward. My father was beside me, his hand resting on mine, steady and warm. He had regained so much of his strength in the weeks that followed Veronica's removal. His eyes were sharper, his posture prouder. And when he walked back into the company as my advisor, the entire boardroom had erupted into applause. It was the first time I saw him cry since I was a child. The double doors creaked open, and the room fell silent. Veronica stepped inside, flanked by her attorney, her eyes scanning this room as if searching for allies that no longer existed. She looked thinner, her hair pulled back too tightly, her sharp cheekbones more pronounced. Gone was the expensive jewelry, the polished veneer of confidence. She wore a black suit, plain and severe. Her eyes landed on me, and I didn't flinch. I met her gaze head-on, unyielding. When she walked past, I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, white orchid, her favorite. I remembered the way it used to fill the hallways of the company, clinging to the air like a warning. Now it was just a ghost, fading with each step she took. The prosecution laid out everything. Piece by piece, the puzzle unraveled before the jury. Veronica's offshore accounts, the funneling of assets, the forged signatures, the manipulation of my father when he was at his weakest. I watched as the jury's faces tightened with each revelation, disbelief turning to disgust. Veronica sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed forward. Her attorney objected where he could, but the evidence was too strong. The signatures matched. The transactions were undeniable. Her name was stamped on every betrayal. I saw her flinch when my father took the stand. His voice was steady as he spoke of their marriage, the trust he had placed in her, and how she had used that trust to strip away everything he had built. He spoke of the nights he couldn't sleep, the way she would smile at him over breakfast, as if nothing was wrong. His hands trembled when he held up his business journal, the one I had pored over in the cabin for weeks. "She thought she'd buried it all," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But my daughter, she found the truth. She brought it back to me." I swallowed the lump in my throat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Veronica didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched, her eyes glassy with unspoken rage. When the verdict was read, the room erupted into whispers. Veronica was stripped of her remaining assets, the company fully returned to my father and me. Her allies, those who had been so eager to bask in her influence, scattered like dust. I saw the way they avoided her, the way they wouldn't meet her eyes as she was led from the courtroom. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. 2 weeks later, I stood in the boardroom, the very same boardroom where she had fired me, her smile glimmering with triumph as she handed me my termination letter. Now, The room was mine. My father sat at the head of the table, his eyes brimming with pride. He had insisted on being there, on watching what would come next. Veronica was escorted in by security, her heels clicking against the polished floor, echoing through the silence. She was no longer adorned with diamonds or draped in designer silk. Her eyes were tired, the makeup no longer masking the lines of stress that creased her forehead. I stood at the head of the table, my hands resting on the back of the leather chair that had once been hers. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. I saw it flicker in her eyes before she quickly masked it. "Sarah," she said, her voice steady but hollow. "This isn't necessary." I raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across my lips. "I disagree." Her eyes flashed with something. Defiance, maybe. "You think this changes anything? Your father, he's weak. He won't last. And when he's gone... I cut in sharply, my voice echoing off the glass. "Walls. His legacy will remain intact, because it's mine now." She flinched, just barely, but I saw it. "You could have been part of it," I continued, stepping closer, my heels clicking with each step. "You could have had everything, but you wanted it all. You couldn't just build. You had to destroy." Veronica's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes gleaming with contempt. "You never understood business, Sarah. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made." I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that surprised even me. "Is that what you call it? Sacrifice? I call it theft." I leaned forward, my hands braced against the table. "And now, you're going to watch me build back everything you tried to burn." She didn't respond. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something behind them. Fear. "You can leave now," I said calmly, stepping back. "Your things have already been sent to your temporary residence." Her gaze didn't falter. If anything, it hardened. But she turned, her heels clicking against the marble as she left the boardroom. The door swung shut behind her, and I let out the breath I'd been holding. My father stepped up beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. "You did good," he said quietly. His voice was thick with emotion, his eyes glimmering under the fluorescent lights. "It's not just mine," I replied, my voice soft. "It's ours." That evening, I stood in his office, gazing out at the skyline as the sun dipped below the horizon. The lights blinked on one by one, stretching out across the city like veins of fire. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, stronger, sharper, unyielding. I held the leather journal in my hands, running my fingers over the worn cover. I had placed it back on my father's desk, right where it belonged. But I kept it open, its pages filled with his handwriting, his legacy, his dreams. I closed my eyes, the weight of everything settling into my bones. It wasn't just a victory, it was a reclamation, a rebirth. Veronica had tried to break me. She had tried to erase me, but I had come back stronger. I had built in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Now, the company was mine. The city stretched before me, its lights flickering with promise. I was no longer just a survivor. I was the architect of my own rebirth. I opened my eyes and whispered to the skyline, my voice steady and unyielding. "It's just the beginning."